I trained my boss. I watched him take credit for everything I built. And when I reported it to HR, they told me to be a team player. 2 weeks later, he fired me. What none of them knew was that I had already planned my exit. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing like this ever does. It starts small, quiet, almost invisible, like a single email sent at 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, "Welcome aboard." That was the day Daniel Carter walked into our office. New manager, late 20s, perfect resume, perfect smile. The kind of person who shakes your hand just a little too firmly, like he's already trying to prove something. I remember standing up from my desk when he arrived. Everyone else clapped. That awkward, corporate kind of applause. I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd seen this before. People like Daniel don't get hired because they understand the work. They get hired because someone, somewhere, already decided they belong. "Hey," he said, walking straight toward me. "You must be Alex." I nodded. "That's me. I've heard a lot about you." He smiled, but there was something off about it. Not fake, not forced, just empty. "I'm gonna need your help getting up to speed," he added. "Of course," I said, and I meant it, because at that point, I still believed this was going to work. I had been with the company for 8 years, long enough to watch entire teams come and go, long enough to build something that actually mattered. The system, that's what everyone called it. Simple name, but underneath, it was everything. Client tracking, sales automation, internal reporting, forecast models. Every moving piece of the company's revenue flowed through something I had built. It wasn't flashy. No one ever congratulated you for building something that just worked. But when it stopped working, that's when people noticed. And for years, it never stopped. Because I made sure it didn't. Daniel didn't understand any of that. Not at first. Day one. I gave him a walkthrough, step by step. No shortcuts, no jargon, just the logic. "This is the intake pipeline," I explained, pulling up the dashboard. "Every client starts here." He leaned back in his chair, nodding, but not really listening. "And this," I pointed to a cluster of automated triggers. "This is what keeps everything synchronized." He tilted his head. "Looks complicated." "It is," I said, "but only if you don't know how it was built." He chuckled. "Guess that's why you're here." I smiled. But something about that sentence stayed with me, because he didn't ask why it worked. He didn't ask how decisions were made inside the system. He just wanted to know how to use it. And that's where everything started to shift. Over the next few weeks, I trained him every day. I showed him how leads were scored, how data flowed between departments, how one small change could ripple across the entire pipeline. I documented everything, or at least everything I was asked to document. But there were parts of the system that weren't written down, not because I was hiding anything, but because some things you only understand after living with them. Patterns, exceptions, the way certain data points behaved under pressure. You don't learn that from a manual. You learn it from experience. And Daniel didn't have that. At first, it didn't matter. He stayed quiet in meetings. Let me do most of the talking. Let me explain the numbers. But then, something changed. It started with a single meeting, quarterly performance review, big room, glass walls, the kind that make everything feel exposed. Daniel stood at the front, slides already loaded, confident, relaxed. I sat 2 chairs back, watching. "This quarter," he began, "we optimized our pipeline efficiency by nearly 27%. I paused. "We." He clicked to the next slide. Graphs, charts, all familiar, too familiar. These improvements came from restructuring how we process incoming leads. He continued. "My system, my logic, my work." I leaned forward slightly, waiting for him to say it, to acknowledge it. He didn't. Not once. Not my name. Not my role. Nothing. Just, "I implemented a new flow." Implemented. That word hit harder than I expected, because implementing something means you understand it, own it, built it, and he hadn't, not even close. The meeting ended with applause. Again, that same polite, empty sound. Daniel walked past me on his way out. "Nice work," he said. I looked at him for a second, longer than usual. Then I nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." That night, I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I needed to think. The office was silent. Lights dimmed. Only the soft hum of servers in the background. I opened the system dashboard. Everything looked normal, stable, controlled, just like always. But something felt different. For the first time, I wasn't sure who it actually belonged to anymore. I reached for my coffee mug. Cold, untouched. There was a small crack along the rim, barely noticeable. It had been there for months. I never replaced it, because it still worked. Even with the crack, I ran my finger along the edge. Slowly. You don't throw something away just because it's damaged. At least, that's what I used to believe. Behind me, the office lights flickered once, then settled, and in that quiet moment, with the system glowing in front of me and the city fading into darkness outside the window, I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And patterns don't fix themselves. They repeat, unless something breaks them. I closed my laptop, left the mug on the desk, and walked out into the night. I didn't know it yet, but that crack, that tiny, almost invisible fracture was the beginning of everything. The next time it happened, it wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. Monday morning, weekly strategy meeting. Daniel stood at the front again. This time, more confident, more comfortable, like he had already settled into the role. I sat in the same seat, 2 chairs back, same room, same glass walls, but something felt different. "This week," Daniel said, "we're introducing a new prioritization model for incoming leads." I froze, because I knew exactly what he was about to show. He clicked to the next slide, and there it was. My model, not inspired by it, not similar to it. It was mine. Same logic, same scoring structure, even the same naming convention I had used internally. He didn't even change the labels. By implementing this system, he continued, I was able to identify high-value clients earlier in the pipeline. I felt something tighten in my chest, because now it wasn't just a mission, it was ownership. I developed this approach after reviewing our previous data flow. He added casually, developed. There it was again, the word. I looked around the room. No one reacted. No one questioned it. Why would they? From their perspective, he was the manager, and I was just the one sitting quietly behind him. After the meeting, people gathered around him. Compliments, nods, approval, great insight, smart move, exactly what we needed. I stayed where I was, watching. Daniel caught my eye across the room, smiled, then gave me a small nod, like we shared something, like this was our success. I didn't nod back. That afternoon, I opened my inbox, and that's when I saw it. An internal email from Daniel, sent to upper management. Subject line, System Optimization Update. I opened it, and there it was. Paragraph after paragraph, explaining the system, my structure, my logic, my decisions, all written as if he had built it from scratch. There were even screenshots I had taken. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I started collecting emails, version histories, timestamps, every piece of proof that showed where the work came from, not out of anger, not yet, but because something inside me had shifted, that quiet feeling from before. It had a shape now, and it wasn't going away. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with HR. Her name was Melissa, mid-30s, calm voice, always smiling. The kind of person who makes you feel like everything is under control, even when it isn't. Her office was smaller than I expected. Neutral colors, soft lighting, a framed quote on the wall, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching." I almost laughed when I saw it. "Alex," she said warmly as I walked in, "what can I help you with?" I sat down, placed my laptop on the table. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I began carefully. She nodded, encouraging. So I showed her the emails, the system logs, the version history, side by side, clear, undeniable. "This was my work," I said, "and it's being presented as his." She listened, nodded slowly, didn't interrupt, didn't react. When I finished, she folded her hands, took a small breath, then smiled. "That does sound frustrating," she said. "Frustrating, not wrong, not concerning, just frustrating. I just want it acknowledged." I said, "That's all." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm sure Daniel didn't mean anything by it," she replied. I blinked. "I have documentation," I said, a little more firmly. "Yes," she said gently, "and I appreciate you bringing this forward." There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Then she added, "But sometimes in collaborative environments, lines can blur. Lines can blur." I stared at her. "This isn't a blur," I said quietly. Another pause. Then the phrase, the one I would remember long after that meeting ended. "I think," she said carefully, "it would be best to approach this as a team dynamic issue." I didn't respond, so she continued, "Maybe focus on strengthening communication moving forward." Still nothing. Then finally, "And try to be a team player." That was it. No investigation, no follow-up, no escalation, just a suggestion, wrapped in polite language. I closed my laptop slowly. "Okay," I said. She smiled again, relieved. "Good," she said. "I'm glad we could talk this through." As I stood up to leave, my eyes drifted back to the frame on her wall. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. I wondered if she believed that, or if it was just decoration. Over the next few days, things didn't get better. They got worse. Daniel stopped asking questions, stopped checking in, started making decisions based on things he didn't fully understand. And every time something almost went wrong, I fixed it, quietly, in the background, like I always had, because that's what I did. I kept things running, even when no one noticed, even when no one asked. But something had changed. Every fix felt heavier. Every Every correction felt like I was holding up something that wasn't mine anymore. And then the email came. Short, formal, subject line, performance review, follow-up, from HR. I opened it. My eyes moved across the words slowly. Concerns regarding collaboration, feedback from management, team alignment. I stopped reading halfway through because I already understood. This wasn't about performance. This was about positioning. Later that week, I was called into a meeting. Conference room. Door closed. Daniel was already inside. Melissa from HR sat beside him, both of them, perfectly composed. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go. Alex, Daniel began. We appreciate everything you've done here. That word, appreciate, past tense. I didn't say anything. Melissa leaned forward slightly. This is a business decision, she said. There it was. Clean, simple, final. We're moving in a different direction. Daniel added, different direction. I almost smiled, because the direction he was talking about was something he didn't even understand. They kept talking. Words like transition, opportunity, support. None of them meant anything. Not really. I just sat there, listening, watching, not angry, not yet, just quiet. Because in that moment, something became very clear. HR hadn't missed the problem. They had seen it, understood it, and chosen to ignore it. When the meeting ended, Melissa stood up first. Thank you for handling this professionally, she said. I looked at her. For a second, I thought about saying something. About the emails, the proof, the conversation we had. But I didn't, because now I understood the system, not the one I built, the one they were operating in, and for the first time, I realized something important. They didn't need me to be right. They needed me to be quiet. I picked up my bag, turned toward the door, and walked out without another word. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same coffee mug in my hand, the crack along the rim, a little more visible now. I traced it again, slowly. It hadn't broken, not completely, just weakened. I took a sip. The coffee tasted different. Or maybe I did. I didn't break anything, I whispered to myself. Then I set the mug down, gently, and for the first time since all of this started, I stopped trying to hold everything together. The first morning after I was let go, I still woke up at the same time. 6:12 a.m. No alarm, just habit. For a moment, I forgot, reached for my phone, checked my email. Nothing new. No notifications. No urgency. No system alerts waiting to be fixed. Just silence. I sat there, staring at the screen, and that's when it hit me. For the first time in 8 years, nothing depended on me. You would think that would feel like freedom. It didn't. It felt like something had been removed, like a weight you've carried so long you don't know how to stand without it. I got up, walked into the kitchen. The coffee mug was still there, same crack along the rim. I poured coffee into it anyway, watched the liquid settle just below the fracture line. It held. Of course it did. It always had. I took a sip, and, for a moment, everything felt normal again. But normal doesn't last. Not when you've already seen how things really work. By the second day, messages started coming in. Not from management, not from HR, from the people who actually used the system. Hey, quick question, is something off with the lead scoring? I think the automation didn't trigger this morning. Do you know why the dashboard numbers don't match? I read each message carefully, Then I did something simple. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because, for the first time, it wasn't my responsibility. And that's when I realized something. The system wasn't breaking. It was behaving exactly the way it was designed to behave when no one understood it. I leaned back in my chair and let that thought sit. I didn't break anything. I said it again. Out loud this time. I just stopped being the one holding everything together. There's a difference. A big one. Breaking something is obvious, messy, immediate. But stepping away, that's quiet, slow, almost invisible. At the office, things didn't fall apart right away. They never do. Systems like that, they're built to absorb pressure, to compensate, to hide small failures before they become visible. But only for a while. By the end of the week, the cracks started showing. Small things at first. A delay in reporting, a mismatch in client data, an automation that triggered twice, then not at all. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing you could point to and say something is wrong. But enough to make people uneasy. And Daniel, he didn't notice, or maybe he did, but didn't understand what he was seeing, because to him, the system was just a tool. Something you clicked, something you presented, something you took credit for. He had never seen it from the inside, never watched how one small variable could shift an entire outcome, never felt the weight of keeping everything aligned. And now, no one was doing that anymore. I found myself checking in, not through messages, but through something else. Old access, read-only dashboards, public-facing metrics, just enough to observe, to watch. The numbers started drifting, not wildly, but subtly, like something just slightly out of balance. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. They weren't adjusting, they weren't fixing, they were presenting. Daniel was still running meetings, still showing slides, still talking about optimization and efficiency, but underneath all of it, the structure was beginning to shift, and he didn't see it, because he couldn't, because to see it, you had to understand how it was built. A few days later, I heard something else. From someone I used to work closely with. They're preparing for a big pitch, she said over the phone. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Investors, she added. Possibly a major client expansion. I leaned back in my chair and, for the first time, I smiled. Because now, it made sense. The urgency, the sudden push, the need to present something that looked stable, that looked scalable, that looked like it was under control, but it wasn't. Not anymore. That night, I opened my laptop again, not to fix anything, not to intervene, just to look. The system dashboard loaded, familiar, predictable, almost comforting. But now, I was seeing it differently, not as something I needed to maintain, but as something I had already let go of. I traced the logic in my head. Every dependency, every hidden layer, every assumption built into the structure, and for the first time, I saw the whole picture. Not just how it worked, but how it would fail. Not all at once, not dramatically, but at the worst possible moment, when someone tried to explain it without understanding it, when someone tried to demonstrate it without knowing what held it together. I closed the laptop slowly. The room was quiet. Still, I reached for the coffee mug again. The crack had spread slightly, just a thin line, branching outward, almost unnoticeable, unless you were looking for it. I turned the mug in my hand, watched how the light caught the fracture. It still held, but not the same way. Not with the same strength. I set it down carefully, because I knew something now. You don't need to break something to watch it fall apart. Sometimes, you just need to stop holding it together and let it reveal what it was always going to become. The day of the presentation arrived quietly. No announcement, no warning, just another calendar entry. 10:00 a.m. Executive conference room. But inside the building, everything felt different. Tighter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I wasn't there, not physically, but that didn't mean I wasn't watching. Old access has a way of lingering, longer than people expect. Read-only dashboards, shared reporting panels, windows into a system that no longer belonged to me. I opened one of them, the main pipeline dashboard, live data, real-time metrics, everything flowing, just like it always had. Almost a slight delay in processing, a mismatch between projected and actual conversions, tiny discrepancies, the kind you only notice if you know where to look. And I did. Back in the office, Daniel stood in front of a room full of people who believed him. That's the thing about confidence. If you show enough of it, people stop asking questions. The room was bigger this time. Executives, senior leadership, 2 external investors. Even Melissa from HR was there, sitting near the end of the table, hands folded. Same calm expression. Daniel adjusted his tie, smiled. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice was steady, controlled, practiced. Behind him, the first slide appeared. Scaling efficiency through system optimization. I almost laughed. He clicked forward. Graphs, growth curves, clean visuals. Everything looked perfect. Of course it did. That part of the system was designed to look perfect. We've restructured our entire intake pipeline. Daniel continued, allowing us to identify high-value clients earlier than ever before. He spoke clearly, confidently, like someone who had done this before. But confidence isn't the same as understanding. I watched the live data feed. A small delay appeared, then corrected itself. Barely noticeable. Daniel moved to the next slide. "This system is fully automated," he said, "requiring minimal manual intervention." That sentence hung in the air, because it was almost true. Almost. One of the investors leaned forward. "How does the system handle irregular data input?" he asked. Daniel paused, just for a second, then smiled. "It adjusts dynamically," he said. I leaned closer to the screen because I knew what was about to happen. Another click. Live demo. This was the moment. The one part of the system you couldn't fake. Daniel typed something into the interface. Simulated input. A new client entry. On the dashboard, the data appeared. For a second, everything looked normal. Then, a delay. Longer this time. The system hesitated, and then it responded, but not the way it should have. The scoring model misfired. The client was categorized incorrectly, a small error. But in that room, small errors weren't small. Daniel blinked. That's he began. Just a temporary sync delay. He tried again. Another input, another pause. This time, the automation triggered twice, then stopped entirely. The dashboard froze, just for a moment, but long enough. Silence settled over the room, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be explained. Daniel cleared his throat. "Let me just..." He clicked again. Nothing. I watched the data feed. The internal logic was unraveling, not breaking, just misaligning. Exactly the way it was designed to. One of the executives leaned back, Can you walk us through how this system actually works? He asked. There it was. The question, simpler, direct, and impossible to answer. Without understanding the foundation, Daniel hesitated, just for a moment. But this time, everyone saw it. Well, he began. It's based on a dynamic prioritization model that... He stopped, because the words didn't connect, because there was no real structure behind them. He tried again. It analyzes incoming data and... Another pause. Longer. The room didn't move, didn't help, didn't interrupt. They just watched, waiting, because now they could feel it too. Something wasn't right. On the screen, the dashboard refreshed again, numbers shifting, out of sync, not dramatically, but enough to raise doubt, enough to break confidence. Daniel stepped back slightly, adjusted his stance, tried to regain control. It's a complex system, he said, forcing a smile. That was the closest he had come to the truth. At the end of the table, Melissa sat still, watching, silent. For the first time, her expression had changed, just slightly, because now, this wasn't a conversation in a quiet office. This wasn't something you could smooth over with careful language. This was visible, public, and it was only getting worse. I looked at the dashboard again. The misalignment was spreading, not failing, not crashing, just drifting further from what it was supposed to be, like a structure holding itself together just long enough to be seen. And then I saw it, a familiar pattern deep inside the system logic, something I had built years ago, a dependency, one that only activated under specific conditions, conditions that had just been triggered. I leaned back slowly, exhaled, because I knew what came next. And in that moment, somewhere between silence and realization, the room was about to change. The room didn't explode. It didn't panic. It didn't fall into chaos. It did something worse. It went still, the kind of stillness that comes right before everything shifts. Daniel stood at the front, hands hovering over the keyboard, waiting for the system to respond, waiting for something, anything, to bring control back. But the system wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Without the right hands guiding it, it revealed everything. Another refresh, numbers updated, and this time, the discrepancy was impossible to ignore. Projected revenue, actual conversion, they didn't match, not even close. One of the investors leaned forward. "That doesn't look right," he said. No one disagreed. Daniel swallowed. "It's just a temporary inconsistency," he replied quickly. Too quickly. He clicked again, tried to pull up another view, another angle, but the deeper he went, the worse it looked. Because now, he wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. The system was, and the system didn't lie. "Walk us through the logic," the CEO said, calm, measured, not angry. "Not yet, just certain." Daniel nodded, tried to steady himself. "It's based on layered scoring." He stopped, because he didn't know what came next, because there was no memorized script for understanding. The silence stretched, and then a voice from the far side of the table, quiet but clear. "Didn't Alex build this?" Everything stopped. Not the system, not the data, just the room. Heads turned, slowly, not toward Daniel, toward the idea, toward the realization that something didn't add up. Daniel didn't answer, because there was no answer that would hold. Another executive leaned forward. "I remember that name," she said. Wasn't he leading this system before? The question didn't sound aggressive, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that forces truth to the surface. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again, and that's when it happened. The second shift. Someone pulled up internal documentation, shared screen, files opened, version history, and there it was. Name after name, timestamp after timestamp. Alex, Alex, Alex. Every core structure, every major update, every foundational decision, all traced back to one person. Not Daniel. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Because now, this wasn't about a system anymore. It was about credibility, about truth, and about who had been standing in front of them, claiming something that wasn't his. Daniel stepped back, just slightly, but enough to show that he had lost control. The CEO didn't look at him, not yet. Instead, his gaze shifted, slowly, deliberately, to the other side of the table, to Melissa. She sat exactly where she had been the entire time, posture straight, hands folded. But now, her stillness meant something different. "You knew about this?" the CEO asked. No accusation, no raised voice, just a question, simpler and impossible to avoid. Melissa didn't answer immediately. For the first time, her composure cracked, not visibly, not to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but I knew, because I had seen that pause before, in her office, when she looked at the evidence and chose not to act. "This was brought up," she said carefully. "Brought up, not reported, not documented, not investigated, just brought up." The CEO's expression didn't change, and he asked, "Another pause, the kind that stretches too long." "We assessed it as a communication issue," she replied. There it was, the same language, the same phrasing, reused, recycled. But here, in this room, it didn't work, because now there was evidence, not just of the work, but of the silence, of the decision to do nothing. The investor leaned back slowly. "So you knew someone else built this system," he said, "and you still let him present it?" No one answered, because there was no answer. That didn't expose everything. The system refreshed again. Numbers shifted. More inconsistencies, more gaps. Not catastrophic, but undeniable. The illusion was gone, and once an illusion breaks, it doesn't come back. Daniel sat down, not because he chose to, but because he had nowhere left to stand. Melissa remained still, but now, stillness wasn't control. It was exposure. The CEO finally spoke again. "Stop the presentation," he said. No anger, no drama, just finality. And just like that, it was over. Not the consequences. Those were just beginning. At home, I stared at the dashboard, watched the numbers settle. Not perfect, not stable, but honest. For the first time in a long time, the system wasn't being forced to look right. It was simply showing what was there. I reached for the coffee mug. The crack had spread again, now branching into something more visible. It still held, but not because it was strong, because it hadn't been pushed far enough to break. I turned it slowly in my hand, and I understood something. The system hadn't exposed Daniel. It hadn't exposed HR. It hadn't exposed the company. It had just stopped hiding the truth. And once that happens, there's no going back. They didn't call right away. Not the next day. Not the day after that. Because that's how companies work. They don't react to truth. They react to impact, and impact takes time. At first, it was quiet. Internal reviews, private conversations, closed-door meetings, the kind no one talks about, but everyone feels. Daniel didn't return to work the following week. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. His name slowly disappeared from internal systems, from email threads, from meeting notes, like he had never really been there. Melissa stayed, at least for a while, but something had changed. People stopped going to her, stopped trusting the calm voice, the careful words, because once you realize someone chose silence, you stop believing anything they say after. I heard all of this secondhand, through old colleagues, through quiet messages that started with, "Hey, I don't know if you heard." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to, because I already understood how this would unfold. Not dramatically, not publicly, just slowly, like everything else. A week later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hi, Alex." The voice was familiar, careful, measured. "Melissa." For a moment, neither of us spoke, and in that silence, everything that had happened sat between us. "I hope you've been well," she said finally. I almost smiled, because that's how these conversations always start. Politely, neutral, like nothing had happened. "I'm fine," I said. Another pause. Then she got to the point. "We'd like to talk to you about coming back." Of course, not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just a request. I leaned back in my chair, looked out the window. The city moved the same way it always had, unbothered. "In what capacity?" I asked. There was a slight shift in her tone. "Senior systems lead," she said. "A promotion. Interesting. We recognize your contributions." She added, "Now they did. And we believe you're critical to stabilizing things moving forward." Stabilizing. That word again. For years, that's exactly what I had been doing. Quietly, without recognition, without support, until it became inconvenient. I didn't respond right away, because this wasn't about the role, or the title, or even the money. It was about something else. Something much simpler. When I asked for help, I said slowly, "You told me to stay quiet." Silence. Real silence this time. Not controlled, not calculated. Just there. And now, I continued. "You want me to fix it?" I could almost hear her breathing on the other end. "This is an opportunity to move forward," she said. Move forward. Another phrase. Another way to avoid saying what actually happened. I looked down at the table. The coffee mug sat in front of me. The crack had spread further now, branching into thin lines across the surface. Still holding, but only just. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my hand. For months, I had kept it, because it still worked, because it wasn't completely broken, because I believed. You don't throw something away just because it's damaged. I ran my thumb along the fracture, felt the uneven edge, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't holding because it was strong. It was holding because I kept using it carefully, avoiding pressure, avoiding stress, protecting something that had already been compromised. I lowered the mug back onto the table, gently. "I'm not coming back," I said. No hesitation, no anger, just clarity. Another pause, longer this time. "I understand," Melissa said quietly, and for once, It sounded like she meant it. We ended the call shortly after. No negotiation, no follow-up, just an ending. A few days later, I packed up the last of my old things. Not from the office, from myself, old files, old notes, old backups. Not because I needed to, but because I was ready to let it go. That evening, I stood in my kitchen again. The same table, the same light, the mug in front of me. I picked it up one last time, turned it slowly. The cracks were no longer subtle, no longer something you had to look for. They were visible, obvious, honest. I walked to the sink, held it there for a moment, not thinking, not hesitating, just understanding. Then I let go. The sound wasn't loud, just a small, sharp break. Ceramic against metal. Fragments. Nothing dramatic, but final. I looked down at the pieces, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had lost something. I felt like I had stopped holding on to it. A week later, I signed a new contract. Different company, smaller team, but better. Not because of the title, not because of the pay, but because of something much simpler. They asked questions. They listened. They wanted to understand. And that made all the difference. Sometimes people think being let go means you lost something. But that's not always true. Sometimes it just means you stopped holding together something that was already broken. And they didn't lose me when they fired me. They lost me when they chose silence over the truth.